Okay, just trying to see. I'm somehow could see the share button. Okay, now I find it.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, good.
Okay, yeah. Let me know if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. So good evening, everyone, and thank you, Tatiana, for this opportunity. And let's begin in interest of time. So I want to make sure. Can someone confirm you can see it in presentation mode?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, good. All right, so so we are going to talk about this Agile-like project delivery model, and there's a reason why I chose the word Agile-like as opposed to Agile, because we are not necessarily 100% Agile, but we are very much close to Agile. And end of the day, something that works, because if you follow the book, if you follow the complete process, the way Agile is written, it may introduce more bureaucracy and more red tape in the process itself, which we have tried to cut down. And so we don't want somebody to say that, hey, you're not 100% Agile. Yes, we know we're not 100% Agile, but we are pretty much 80, 90% there. And the only reason we try to remove the excess fat from the process, try to keep the process lean and lightweight. So one of the things I like to share is that a successful project, regardless of the methodology, whether it's Agile or whether it's waterfall or whether it's SDLC, is built on 4 key pillars. People, remember, this is very important. You all are the lifeblood of any project. So that's people who are going to deliver the project. The process could be Agile, could be waterfall, whatever we chose to go ahead with. Obviously, tools and technology, the software, the communication tools, the collaboration tools. So I know Tatiana is proposing GitHub, Slacks, all this part of that tools and technology. And the governance. Governance is about putting some discipline and rigor to the whole thing. So good governance is about leadership, management, accountability. All these are 4 vital pillars of any project. And even if one pillar collapses, this is what happens to the project. A project, one broken leg, and your project will collapse, regardless of which leg is broken. So we have people, and people here are basically roles with preset responsibilities. So people enact that role. And so these are the roles. I want to come to the roles in a minute for a moment, because if I just jump you on the roles here, it may get a little confusing. So I'll come to this in a minute. So there are a few roles in the project, and I'll talk about this in a while. So the process part. So there's process. Remember, process serves like a binding rope for a project. It binds all the moving parts of the project. Okay, so that's important. A project without process is sure short remedy for failure. So it binds together people, technology, and objective. Objective is the project objective. Obviously, every project will have some objective, some mission in mind. So that's what a process does. It binds people, technology, and objective. We are also going to talk about guidelines and best practices today. So this is what I was telling you, Tatiana. So I have documented all the best practices. So you always will have the reference on these things. So what I'm going to, what you see here is what I'm going to present in a few minutes now. And so here we go. Okay. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to interject me and ask. You don't have to wait till the end of the session. I'm perfectly fine to be interrupted if anything crops up your mind. So the Agile-like process that we're just now talking has few key roles, and we'll go into the details of those roles in the slide that you see. But the key players, or the key actors in this are a business analyst and a scrum master. Could be also a scrum master, could be a project manager, a dev team. So dev team or the development team comprises primarily of a developer. There's a lead developer, what we refer to as a dev lead. There's an architect, and there's an engineer. There is the tester. Now there is two flavors of tester. There is the QA tester, and there's the UA tester. QA does the functional testing, quality assurance testing. UA is the user acceptance testing. So if a particular line of code is developed, and if the lines of code is breaking and it needs to be tested for some kind of a functionality check or for regression. Regression is when you have multiple moving pieces of code, you have 5 pieces of code and you bring them together, you integrate them together. The 6th piece that you add, does it break down your original 5 pieces? So that's the regression testing. So those kind of testings are all done by the QA tester. On the other hand, the UA tester, which is the user acceptance tester, what he or she does is they look at things from a user functionality. They are layman users. They're the people who are going to use the product, whether it's a website, whether it's an application, mobile application, the user. So it's always the user dimensions. That's the UA tester. And then there is the customerism. This is a very important role for any project. End of the day, how do we measure a project is successful or not? It all depends on whether or not the customer is pleased, because end of the day, who pays for the customer? Who pays for the project? It's always the customer, directly or indirectly, they fund it. So we have to ensure customer satisfaction at all times. So that's why the customer SME is another important role to play. And there is a product owner. Now, product owner and customer SME could be part of the same team. The difference is product owner is more a senior role, a management type role, executive leadership type role, whereas customer SME is a person who actually is very close to the product, he knows the nut and bolts of the product. So that's customer SME. All right. Now, going into the individual roles before we get into the swim lane. So I'll come back, as I said, here we go. So we saw there is a business analyst. A business analyst is the very first entity in the process who will go and do the interviews. He will interview customer SME and a product owner. A product owner is the one who understands the product vision, and the customer SME understands, and even the product owner understands the features and functionality they expect. So the BA will go and interview them. It's basically gathering the requirements, or as we refer to as requirements elicitation. So they facilitate the requirements review meeting to secure those requirements and discover the customer needs. Now, because we chose consciously to follow the Agile-like delivery model, the Agile-like delivery model principles, and by the way, I may be jumping between the slides, but this is only to make it more clear to the whole picture. So pardon me if I keep jumping slides. So basically, when we say Agile-like delivery model, there are few thumb rules, or what I call the mantras, the core mantras of a process. Number one, unlike the waterfall, Agile process is all about progress or perfection. People try to become perfect and document the requirements and develop the design of the most perfect product in the world. 5 years from now, they will launch it. And you know what? When they're ready to launch it, that product has already become obsolete because something else has come in the market. And you know, IT line is so volatile. So Agile is all about progress or perfection. That's the first mantra. So incremental action, incremental output speaks way louder than far-fetched thinking. So that's why this whole Agile concept was evolved. So remember, something done or everything undone, that's no good. We want something done and not everything undone, and we're just thinking. So it's okay to deliver the work output incrementally rather than a full-fledged solution, so that's the whole thing. So Agile brought this new terminology called MVP. I don't know if you all heard it. It's called minimum viable product. So if you have a product in mind, you can chunk it into smaller installments. And that's what you see companies like Microsoft do. Oh, our release 1.1 and Microsoft Windows 16 and Microsoft Windows 18 and Microsoft Windows 20. It never ends, it just goes on. So that each of that release, that's a minimum viable product. It's perfectly acceptable to not deliver everything at once, because remember, we believe progress over perfection. So that's the first thing about an agile approach. The second thing is the sprint. In agile, we follow the sprint. So sprint is nothing but a time box event to deliver the work chosen from the product backlog. So like when we say a week in a calendar week comprised of 7 days, Mondays to Sunday, you go any country in any world, for them, it's the week is of 7 days. You don't go in a country in the world which says, oh, by the way, my week is 8 days. No, it's 7 days. So it's a time box event. Same sprint is a time box event. And in that time box event, you as a group choose what you can do and what you cannot do. Now, sprint durations vary from company to company, organization to organization. So when we discuss with Tatiana, we are proposing that we probably go for a 2-week sprint, which is a normal sprint. Some companies go for 3 weeks and 4 weeks. And as you make the sprint duration too longer, it slowly people tend to fall into a trap of following a waterfall approach. And so because they say, oh, we have 3 months to deliver this sprint, let's do this, let's do that. So it should be quick. It should be quick, instant. So sprint is, we are saying back-to-back 2 weeks, Monday to Friday. So Monday to actually Sunday. And the do's and don'ts. So the priority, when we break down, and I'll come to stories in a minute. So when in the sprint, what we choose stories to be delivered. That which stories to pick on, which stories to work on, that priority is set by the customer SME and the product owner. If product owner is hands-on, then they get involved. Otherwise, customer SME, they will say, oh, let's go for this story, let's go for that requirement. All right. So, and the customer requirements or product functionality should be always assigned high priority. In a sprint, you can choose work that is related to features and functionalities, but you can also choose work that is to support some other things. So always the requirements get higher priority. The success of an agile model is continuous collaboration, continuous communication, continuous collaboration between customer SME and the people who are delivering the product. That should be a de facto behavior. You don't want to hear complaints. That's what happened in some waterfall projects where they work for 6 months or 1 year to deliver something. And then when they do a demo to the customer says, oops, this is not what I want. And then, then the relationship becomes sour and you miss the customer satisfaction aspect. So it should be continuous collaboration. The collaboration could be in written email forms, could be through Slack channel, could be picking up your phone, and so on. Always, Agile is all about smaller chunks of work. So larger stories should be broken into smaller stories where possible. And any bugs and defects, and we'll go into that in a few minutes, any bugs and defects that you find in terms of the stories not being delivered, they should be escalated to the Scrum Master or PM to drive the remedial actions with the dev team, customer SME, and stakeholders. The don'ts is there's a tendency that people try to bring changes into sprint midway. Once you decide this sprint, I'm going to do these 10 stories or this 5 stories, stick to plan what you do and do what you plan. So don't just because it's agile, you don't be so super agile that stories keep going in and out of the sprint. Then again, it will turn into chaos. And then there are sprint ceremonies. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. There are sprint ceremonies like sprint planning and sprint review retrospective. Many times there's a tendency, there's some high priority topics that needs to be discussed and they don't get stakeholders. They'll say, okay, let's use the sprint planning call to do that. No, don't do that. Don't do disservice to those ceremonies. So those ceremonies have a designated purpose. They have an objective, so they should be only used for that purpose. Product backlog. So this is a list of features and stories. Every product will have some features and functionality, and there'll be stories aligned to those features and functionalities. So collectively, they are referred to as the product backlogs, which basically defines and articulates the business. So this product backlog is typically owned by product owner. And this continues to evolve. So the whole concept of agile is being nimble, being adjustable. So there's no set end to that. And so in agile, some people say, oh, agile is all about scope creep. No, not necessarily. Scope creep happens when you start to introduce extra stories into the sprint. That is scope creep. Agile, you can accommodate as much requirements customer wants. There's no end to it. That doesn't mean you start working on everything. That's where the prioritization comes in. So you work on that set priority stories, and that's the scope of that sprint. And you religiously, steadfastly maintain that. But that doesn't stop customer from pouring in more requirements. A feature is a chunk of functionality comprising of multiple interdependent stories. So they all tie together, and then the whole purpose of feature is it should accomplish either some business value, some customer requirements, or as I mentioned, minimum viable product. When you're developing a story or a feature, when the BA is writing a story or feature, one of the things they have to find out is the value and benefit of that story. Don't just create stories for the sake of creating. So there should be a question like, so what? We are going to do this, so what? Why do we do this? So that should be the mindset. Epic. Epic is just a conceptual term. Basically, when you group multiple stories to represent a larger objective, that's referred to as an epic. So if it's a smaller scale, you don't necessarily need an epic. You can still just do with the stories itself. Like stories, they're prioritized by the product owner and leadership. And remember, whether it's a story or a feature, and at the work level, it's always story. So they have to be approved by the customers, and that's very important. That's where you start to make the customer SME engage. When it comes to epics, they will have a start date and end date, because you may have a big epic. You may have a big epic, and the epic may go on for 1 year. Stories, on the other hand, the start date and end date is start date and end date of a sprint. So when you say, I'm going to deliver the story number 1, in sprint number 1, what you're saying is the start date of story number 1 and maybe story number 5, because you have selected 5 stories and they all go in a sprint 1. So all the 5 stories, the start date would be the first day of the sprint and the last day of the sprint. That's the start and end date. That's for story. But epic is like a laundry list of stories. It's like a catalog of stories. And that could take a longer time. And so that's always good to have a clear vision of how long the epic will go on, because epic will drive the funding. If your project runs for 1 year, you will need X amount of funding. If your project runs for 5 years, you need a Y amount of funding. And so that's why it's important. I'll take a pause. Any questions so far? Tatiana, please know if I'm going too fast, too slow. I mean, I know I want to cover a lot of things, so I might be a little speeding up.
I think we have a question from Laura.
Sure, let me check.
Hi there. I wanted to ask you, when a sprint goal is not met, what happens to that set of goals? Do those go back into the priority process and go back in for reevaluation, or is the sprint extended?
No, sprint never gets extended. It's a time box event. So it's the same thing. I have a soccer match planned for this Sunday and it's raining. And so now that soccer match doesn't happen. So that doesn't mean I extend the Sunday to another 48 hours. No, Sunday is Sunday. I just say, now I'm going to do that on Monday or Tuesday. So the story gets spilled over into next sprint. And then it determines the ability for your next sprint, because now what happened is you may originally thought I might put 5 stories in the next sprint, but you have 3 spillover stories coming up from this sprint, carrying over into that sprint. So now you have to manage your resources accordingly, the Scrum Master, because you don't want to overburden the next sprint. Otherwise, it starts to become a normal routine. The general thumb rule is we try to avoid stories that spill over, but if they spill over, it's perfectly fine. Nobody gets crucified for spilling over a story. Nobody should be brought in the public hall of shame to say, hey, you didn't deliver your promise. That's totally understandable. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That answers
You're
my
welcome.
question.
Okay. So what's a story? A story is a description of a product, feature, or functionality. It's a chunk of work tied to the epic. Epic is the big thing. And it should be written in a very simple, plain English. It should have the who, what, and why components. I was trying to think of some example. Maybe this is not a good example in university, but I just tried to make it up. So imagine the university, you have a university and you have a coach of some soccer field or whatever, soccer team, and he's trying to give a story. So it should always have the who part. So as a university team coach, remember, story should be written in a very layman-friendly language. So as a university team coach, that's the what, the who, sorry. Then the what. I would like a report that shows blah, blah. And then in this case, I just made it up. I like to have a report that shows each team member's performance statistics in the inter-college events. So this coach is very conscious about his team. He wants to bring them up, their skills, but he wants stats for that. And he wants a report so he can look at who is weak in what area. And then there's the why part of it, so that I can coach my team to help them reach their goals. So this is just a simple example I made, but that's an example of a good story, which has the who, the what, and why elements written in simple lame. The best thing is stories should be written by a BA. Remember, the BA is the one who develops it, because BA is not that technically intense person, and we don't want technically intense person because then they will throw all kinds of technical jargon in that, and nobody will understand it. This should be somebody who looks at it and understand it. A story shell or draft should be completed prior to. Now remember, once you have a story, it should have an acceptance criteria. An acceptance criteria is the one that basically tells whether the story has been delivered to the satisfaction of the customer. So that's very important. But we should first draft a story, review it, and then add the acceptance criteria, because otherwise people have a tendency to drive the story definition with the acceptance criteria, and it becomes all chaos. So always draft a story, review it with the SME, say, you like it? Yeah, I like it. Now tell me what's the acceptance criteria. Then add it, then again review it with the SME. So story should be written by BA and with input from customer SME. It's always from a customer standpoint. And it should be tied to an epic or feature. Then comes the acceptance criteria. Now, acceptance criteria are preconditions added to the story so that it helps to validate and test towards the tail end of it. And it should indicate the minimum customer satisfaction expectation. So tomorrow, customer should not say, hey, you guys suck, you guys didn't deliver it. No, you agreed on this acceptance criteria, Mr. Customer. And so we delivered that. So acceptance criteria should be written in a manner that it will be verifiable. For example, referring in this example of a university coach story, the acceptance criteria could be, so what we're trying to do here, we're trying to create a report. That's the product that's coming out of this. So we're developing a report. So the acceptance criteria could be, the report should have stats for last 5 events for the top 5 performance evaluation categories. I couldn't think of categories in maybe soccer or whatever. I'm sure the coach know what they want to evaluate. So those 5 categories, these are the 5 categories we want to report on. And the report should be available on the university web portal so that anybody can go in, not just the coach, but even the professor, the dean, whoever wants, they can go and look at it. And we want the report to be auto-populated once a month with the latest stats data, because this college is so active in sports, it conducts events weeks on weeks. So we want data keep coming in and the reports keep generated. So that's the acceptance criteria. So toward the tail end, now we have very crisp acceptance criteria. If this is met, it's a tick in the box and nobody can debate and argue that this was not delivered. So an acceptance criteria should be added to the story only after the story was reasonably articulated. Till then, don't add it. because that way you know what's the scope of that story. And once that is done, then add the acceptance criteria. And on this thing, as you can see, it's very vital. The customer SME should be brought into consultation. Now, what's the bugs or defects? Bugs or defects basically in simple, and by the way, when I use the word story in this documentation, I hope you all understand. Story here refers to a piece of code. So in your mind, you should have that mapping created. Story refers to code. A story is trying to deliver a code. Sometimes you could have a story for non-code related work as well, like creating a playbook, a documentation. There could be a story for that. So you're not necessarily developing a code, but you're developing a supporting documentation. But generally, loosely, if I have to say, its story refers to a code. So what are the potential triggers for this? Bug or defects? Basically, stories, you have a delivered story, the functionality kind of works, but doesn't completely fulfill the customer needs. So just now, Laura had asked that question, oh, what happened if the story doesn't deliver? So if the story had partially delivered, the remaining part of it, if it's not working, it could be treated as a bug or a defect, or it could be a deficiency. It could be neither bug nor defect, but it's some deficiency that needs to be addressed. There could be some miscommunication that happens during the process, and that could also trigger a bug. It's expectation mismatch, and that's why it's very important having the customer SME kept collaborated so that you don't have that issues. Scope creep, the story scope creep, we should try, and that's where the Scrum Masters should have a very tight fist. Once the story has been locked down with the scope of the story as written, the who, what, why, and the acceptance criteria, no changes should be allowed. Having said that, in real life, there's always room for some change. Sometimes things do break. They create a story, they create acceptance criteria, but when they start to actually do the code, develop the lines of code, they realize, oops, this cannot work. Oops, that data feed is not available. Oops, in order to get that piece of data, I need to go to that system, which I don't have the access right now. Those kind of things. Remediation strategies. So what do you do? This goes back to your question, Laura. So deploy the story as a basis in lieu of the partial business value delivered. If there's some value being generated, remember progress over perfection. At least you can pat your back. Hey, yesterday I had 0% progress. Today I have 5%. I'm not at 25% level, but I'm at 5%. Pat my back. So that's the partial business value provided, and then create a new story to address the missing functionality or deficiency. Or you can totally, if the defect is so horrible that it's not palatable, you cannot take it, then discard the story, remove the story, and set it back to the product backlog. Communicate back to the customer SME and to the product owner, more to the customer SME, and redefine the stories, letting them know why this happens, and so that it can be added back into the process for future inclusion. Story point estimates. Now, Tatiana, I will leave it to your discussion for this project, whether you want to include story point estimates. Depends. This becomes more relevant in companies, large companies, where you have hundreds of stories developed, and you don't have that much capacity to take on all the stories same time. So you need some measure to decide which stories to pick on in the planning. So one of the criteria when you pick a story is the level of efforts involved, and of course, the complexity of the story and the availability of the resources with the right competency. All these factors weigh in choosing a story in the sprint planning. And of course, most important, the priority of the story as laid by the customers. But in this case, in your college project, maybe this point may not be required. It could be treated optionally. But if you had to do it, then the story point estimation typically, which indicates a level of efforts estimate, should be provided by the dev lead or could be a dev team member. Normally in organizations, we don't bring the developer into those voting sessions because we don't want to abuse the developer's time. They are heads down, they're busy developing the code. You drag them into 10 meetings, then they get distracted. So, but the dev lead is a senior developer who has that level of maturity, and he or she attends the meeting, and they can go in and the voting. In addition to architects also participate in the story point estimation. We follow, normally one recommendation is to follow the Fibonacci sequence. So Fibonacci is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and it goes on. You can do some research on the net, what's Fibonacci sequence. But simple, and this is not exact correlation, a loose correlation. The one could be equated to 1 day effort. Okay, this is the loose, and remember, this is not time, it's effort. Effort, coding time, basically, not so. You may have to develop 3 hours worth of coding time, but the developer is a slacker, lazy bugger, and he takes 1 week and he codes, I need 1 week. That doesn't mean he's working, if 8 day times 1 week, 8 times 7, or 8 times 5, it's not working 40 hours on the code, he's only working 4 hours. So remember, so the point is I'm making here is, effort is not equal to schedule. You may have a 3 hour worth of effort, but you may take 1 week to do it because of your other priorities. So this is all about effort. So when we say 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, this is loosely tied to the effort. To the 1 day worth of effort, or 2 day worth of effort, or 3 day and 5 day or 8 day. Why? You'll notice it's only up to 8 days, because we said we will have a sprint of back-to-back 10 days. I'm not counting weekends. So people are assuming working Monday to Friday, although the sprint starts from Monday and goes all the way to next Sunday. So it's totally 14 days. But the productive time, people are in front of computer, maybe it's 5 days, first week, and 5 days, second week, so 10 days. So what we're saying here is we should not have any story which should have effort more than 8 days, because the first day is a Monday, is a sprint planning day, and the last Friday is the day is used for sprint review and all that. So those days are considered less productive. These are more soft days. So the in between only 8 days you get, 8 business days. And so that's why we should make sure that no story should have a level of efforts more than 8 days. And if somebody, during the story point estimation, if we realize that, oops, the story is huge, and it needs 16 days of effort, literal coding time, then you know what should we do? Can anybody answer? In the planning, we find that this story is 16 days. Any idea what we'll do? We can only go up to 8 days.
Break.
You got it, bingo. That's what you do. You break the stories. So then it's a quick litmus test to tell us that, no, you're wrong here, something is not right. Go and break it down. So that was, I'll take a pause again. Any questions so far?
I just want to add that that used to be my favorite meeting at the company where I worked. We use cards to estimate, and I was part there. So I felt like my opinion always was heard, even if I didn't know really what was going on. We used the A's for the very hard story, and the Jack for very easy story. I think it would be nice for our students to experience it at least once.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah,
that's one way of doing it, but that works very well when you have like all people in one room, and maybe you have a way to do that in your remote tools. What we do, and that's no way is right or wrong, all ways are acceptable. What we do, because our team is scattered across the globe, so it's hard for everybody to, so we open the Teams chat, and we use the score. So we say, okay, this story, please convey your vote. So the BA will drive that meeting. Everybody, all the voting, and only limited voting members are assigned. The rest of the people can watch the show and enjoy the fun, but only few people should be given the voting rights. You don't have 10 people voting, then the meeting will never end. It's a 1.5 hour meeting. So we do that. Each of them puts their vote. So let's say 3 people. Try to always choose at least odd number of people who vote, because if you have even, then you may have a tie, and then you need a tiebreaker. So if you have 3 people, then 2 said 3 and 1 said 5, then you go with the 3. That's how we do. But yeah, that card is also a very great method. But I love the card method because it's fun. Okay, so meetings. So these are the meetings that happen. Sprint planning meeting. So this is the first meeting that, and by the way, these meetings that you see, these are the main meetings. That doesn't preclude the team members to interact and do a one-on-one sessions as required. So you should not think that you should only interact through these means. These are the more formal structured meetings. So sprint planning, this meeting should be facilitated by a Scrum Master or PM, the guy who's playing that role. We recommend hosting it on the first Monday of the active sprint. So as I said, the sprint starts on Monday of first week and ends on the Sunday of second week. But the productive days are business days. So it should start on the first Monday of the active sprint. It could be a 1.5 hour duration session. Now this meeting should have the entire Scrum team. When I say entire Scrum team, it's pretty much everybody who's involved. The development team, the architect, the engineering lead, the product owner, the customer SME, the UA tester, the QA tester, everybody should be part of that meeting, because that's the whole thing. It's also a process of socialization of what is the, somebody will say, what is the scope of your sprint? Well, then you have to be in the meeting, so you'll know what we selected the scope of the meeting. And it will be the entire Scrum team and the product owner. He's a senior, he or she is a senior person, but we try to limit their presence in at least 2 meetings, which is the sprint planning meeting. Then outside of that, there's a customer requirements meeting that the BA initially does. And then at the end, we should invite them for the customer review and retrospective session. So all team members should review and decide what items to do. I'll go in a process with you in a while. So I won't go into all the bullets here, but primarily you can read it offline, but primarily it should be a combination of, when you select a story in sprint planning, most important, look at the priority, then look at the complexity and look at the level of effort. And then most important, whether you have all the resources available or not, because customer may say this is priority, but what if you don't have the right manpower to deliver that story? Then what's the point in selecting that? Team should try to make realistic commitments. So basically, in some cases, you may find that a story, the effort is really within that 8-day window. Now, one more thing I forgot, maybe, I hope you don't misunderstand. When I was explaining to you the level of efforts, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 days, that 8 days should not be, in your mind, you should not only think it's effort for coding. Otherwise, that's another tendency developers have. They say, oh, coding, I need 8 days or 5 days, whatever. That's no good. You code, then you test. You do the QA test. There's some time the QA tester needs. There's some time the UA tester needs. There's some time the customer SME needs. That has to be built into that time. Only then you can deliver the sprint end-to-end in that 2 weeks. So remember, that's very important. Now, once this sprint planning meeting happens on a Monday, the very next thing, the same Monday should happen as soon as possible. It should be a task definition, and you will see that in the process shortly. A task definition breakout session should be done, which is done by the dev lead, chaired by the dev lead at meeting. And that's when you dissect the story into small tasks. So each story may have 5 tasks. And then the dev lead assigns, okay, you do this task, you do that task, you do this task. So that's what task breakout session. And then, of course, the dev, this is not dev lead. I think I made a mistake here. I need to fix this. It's actually the developer. So it's not the dev lead, it's actually the developer. So the developer or the dev team member should initiate I'll fix this, initiate a bi-directional collaboration with the customer SME. So normally that's very important. As soon as the story, you start working on it, the first thing we encourage is that, especially when I run projects and program, I tell the team, by Monday noon, you need to send a chat out. Because in Microsoft Teams, you can have a chat session with 7, 8 people on that chat. And you just can say, hello, I'm working on this story. That's all you need to do. Start that chat session. Who should be a part of that chat session? Customer SME, QA tester. You say, hello team, just want to let you know I have been assigned to this. I'm going to start working on this. And then anyway, you make some progress, one little chat, and that's how the collaboration keeps going. Then and that partnership between the dev team member and these other people should run throughout the sprint. Daily stand-ups. This is another call that should happen from Tuesday onwards. It should be facilitated by Scrum Master PM. Now, another people fall trap of is they treat it as a status call. This is not a status call. This is a daily standard. It should be limited to 15 minutes. People to have a tendency to tell stories and stories of what they did. I remember back in other company when we had this guy. He was fantastic, and he used to run these scrums. And people, when they start to chatter, he want to shut them up, and at the same time he don't want to say shut up because people will feel offended. So what he should do, every time they go too much, they'll say quack quack. He'll say quack quack. And it used to be humorous. Everybody will start laughing, and then the talker will know, oh, I need to shut, and he'll shut. So there are ways you can, modify it. So really,
I'm writing this down.
Quack quack. You can create your own cuckoo, whatever sounds. So basically, you should not keep it the whole duration for more than 15 minutes, and really the focus should be what each team member should be trained to just in very succinctly, very quickly. Okay, yesterday I worked on this. It's really that small piece of work you did yesterday. It shouldn't take more than 10 seconds to remember what you did yesterday. I worked on this yesterday. This is what I plan to work on, and there's no blockers. Or I have a blocker. And if I have a blocker, then it needs a little more discussion. If that discussion can be quick, great. If not, then it calls for an offline discussion after the call, because you should swiftly do it. In fact, in some companies where the people have on site, what they will do is they will stand in circles. Everybody will stand in circle, and the Scrum Master will stand in the middle, and like that, he will just go on and round and round. So it should be quick. Now, if there are some stories that need significant scope change, then that needs more thoughtful discussion, and that should be taken off outside that meeting. And there should be discussion with the wider audience to decide what should be the approach to handle that. Backlog grooming. This is obviously before the sprint, the backlog grooming meeting happens. This is, as I mentioned before, it's driven by the business analyst. This meeting, it's recommended to do it once or twice a week for 1.5 hours. Key participant for this meeting should be a dev lead, architecture, engineering lead, and customer service. We don't need a developer on this call. We do need developer on daily stand-ups and sprint planning meeting, but for backlog grooming, we don't need a developer, but a dev lead should be there. And the customer SME should be invited for that. Why? Because then it gives an opportunity for these technical people to do some Q&A and clarify and so on. Now, during the backlog meeting, these few things needs to be checked. The dev lead, in some cases, you may not have the luxury of a dev lead, and so in that case, you have no choice but to bring the dev team member. They'd come in and do a Q&A with the customer SME to clarify the requirements, the acceptance criteria, and so on. Because until that point, remember, the BA has interacted with the customer SME. These people haven't interacted. So this is their first opportunity to interact with the customer SME. And they should do the voting on the story point estimates, as we discussed earlier. And they should determine in that itself that whether the story has a dependency, something on else. Just like I was saying, you need to do something report, and there's a data feed for which you need to get the data into the system. And that data feed, you need to look at the authentication aspect and access aspect. Now that's a hard dependency. Until the dependency is resolved, there's no point you even take the story into the sprint planning session because you're not ready for that. So that's important. So once that is all tick in the box, then that story should be marked as ready. In other words, it's ready to be planned. It's ready to pick up for planning. It has gone through the grooming audience, grooming process. And when the story is planned in a sprint planning session, then we level it as to do. So normally, if you are all in, even I don't know, Tatiana, your tools may have that. You can have a online board. We usually have like a Kanban board. So you'll have stories. You'll have a column called product backlog. That's like raw stories yet to be reviewed. Once the stories are properly groomed, then they go into a ready column. And once that stories have been planned, they go into the to-do column. In other words, this is the to-do list of stories to be, executed in this sprint. And then there will be another one, work in progress and complete column. You can have a board like that. That's possible. Normally, I have seen in other place where I had an on-site team, what we did was we created stickies, those yellow stickies, and you just scribble some keyword on about the story, not the whole story. Everything will be there in an Excel spreadsheet or electronic, but you just put it on the board. You stick the sticky on the board in the respective column, and every day you move the sticky from here to there. And I used to see, we created magnetic stickies. We even got magnetic stickies to stick on the board so they don't fall down. And we used to see a lot of managing directors. They used to be very amused to see what's going on. So they get like a real-time progress there. So
yes, I
that's
think Laura already found one of the tools similar to that, but more digital, so less paper.
No, digital better actually, because that way your executives at any point of time, they go to the Kanban board. We also have digital here. We use Azure DevOps, for example, but you're different, there's so many tools. There's Jira there and so on. That board thing that I told you, that works only if you have everybody co-located in one office. But otherwise, I think I would go for the digital version. But the beauty of that is any point of time people go on holidays, vacation, they come in, they just look at the board and they'll see what's going on, which story at what stage. Finally, this is the sprint review meeting that's facilitated by the Scrum Master. This, as I mentioned, it should be on the last day, typically the last Friday of the active sprint, or basically second Friday in our case. Now, this meeting should have two parts. The first part should be discuss what went right and what went wrong. This is not public shaming here. As much as possible, don't take names. People, you don't want to burn bridges with people. Be issue focused. We are not here to publicly shame somebody. Oh, Tom did this thing bad, and so Harry got impacted. No. We don't go in that. We don't fall. So I was telling you other day, Tatiana, I encourage the SIR format. SIR is symptom, impact, and remediation. Very objective. What is the symptom? Oh, this is broken. Okay. What was the impact? Oh, this got broken, so I lost 5 days of coding time because of that, because I was not able to access that environment. And what's the remediation? Oh, remediation, we escalated to that team, we got it resolved, we went to help desk, we got it fixed. And so it's very objective focus, because if that's happening again and again, then behind the scene, you may have to bring it to that team's manager and let them know, hey, something is not right in your team. That's the first part of the meeting. The second part of the meeting is where the develop team, this is your opportunity to showcase what you've done. So it's also, some people call it show and tell. You show what you've done. So it could be a piece of code, you show, it could be like an MVP overview, whatever, it could be a document you walk through. Each developer, depends, remember it's a 1 hour session, and depending on how many developers, you have 6, 7 developers, the talk time should be limited to 5 minutes, 5-6 minutes at the most. So they should train to deliver their output in a very succinct way. So each person gets 5 minutes, there's 6 people, let's say presenting, that's 30 minutes already gone. In that second part, the first part is more what went right, what went wrong, that will take another 15-20 minutes. And that's it, the whole meeting time is over. So, all right. Before I go, any questions? So far, so good. How are we doing on time, Tatiana? Sorry, I lost track sense of time.
We have a question. I just saw a hand.
Okay.
It's gone.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I had it up for a brief second. It's not very important, but I was very curious how this process works with outside teams, like let's say the creative departments or the funding departments that you were discussing, briefly on the outskirts of this process.
It's exactly the same method. It's the same method. So regardless of, remember the story was written in a format that is very layman friendly. So it depends on whichever department it is. It's the same thing. One thing to take note, the customer SME is actually a user. It could be any user. You could apply this approach for marketing, for sales department, for whatever audit department, because end of the day, they all are users of IT. It's like we go in a garage, our car is broken. We don't want the mechanic to tell us, by the way, this is the axle and this is how I'm going to fix this and this is this. We'll get bored. We say, okay, this is tell us what's broken, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost. So that the customer SME is more about that. They don't necessarily need to know, or they don't even care to know unless they're very technically savvy. What's the mechanics behind all this? And so if that's the case, it's pretty agnostic of what industry it is. But did that answer your question, Laura?
Yeah, I believe it did. So I was under the impression that for some reason they would not be also operating under Agile, but it sounds like everybody is operating.
Everybody, yeah. You have to educate them. You have to educate them, get them to buy. And believe me, initially this is a new way of thinking, new approach. Customers may not understand it, but once they see it, they begin to appreciate it because they see what's going on. They're part of the process. Every time when you do a chat, remember the first day you created a chat session as a developer, hi team, and that hi team includes customers system. Hi team, I have this piece of code. Hey QA tester, can you test it? Hey UA tester. Customer don't have to be there in every daily stand-up meeting to listen in. He just sees the moment on the chat and he feels good. Oh, the boys and girls are busy. They're doing what they need to do. And they feel happy about it. They see some progress. Remember, progress over perfection. They don't have to wait for 2 weeks in a status update meeting to get an update. They are getting update on a daily basis in real time. Okay. So yeah, sorry, what's the time we have, Tatiana? So
we have full 4 minutes.
Wow, what a generous time we have. So, I know this is a topic that certainly needs more than an hour for sure. So
Raj, I'm so sorry. I just want to let you know that I will have to run. And okay. Do you mind if someone else will finish will stop the recording and
Sure.
Yes,
absolutely. I'm totally fine. And if we need to do a follow-on for any further questions your team has in future, I'm happy to be part of that discussion.
Yes, so I want to let you know if you have a little more, we can give you a little more time if you want to go over the Scrum. It's just not going to be with me. I will have to leave. But if you think you're going to need another meeting, we can definitely organize that.
It's up to you. I mean, it's more, should we do another later on to go through the process now that they have this little bit of background on what I'll do is I'll upload the slides today, this whole deck, this typo I made, I'll fix that and I'll upload it. If you are okay to share it with the team, or I'll leave it to your discussion when you want to share with the team, let them review it. And then we can have another session where I can walk through the Visio just to chart it out, because now they will have a little background of all the meetings and the roles. We already discussed that. So that then the process will become more clear to them, and then they can have an opportunity to Q&A. Because if I start to rush now in the next 3 minutes, it's disservice to the team. So
you're absolutely right. Yes. And I think it's going to be great now for students that they're going to have some time to pick roles, to read a little bit more about that.
Pick a role, and I encourage people. So how long your semester goes, Tatiana? Is it like a year, or like, not, I mean, how long this project will go? Is it for a few semesters or?
Maybe a few semesters, maybe longer.
Okay, so it depends.
We just come up with new
requirements. What I'm getting at is, assuming this project goes for a few semesters, and your semester is what, 3 months or 6 months?
3-4 months.
3-4 months. So let's say it goes for a year, hypothetically. What I encourage to do is, for first quarter, people play a role. They choose a role. Second quarter, switch the roles. Third quarter, switch the role. So everybody gets a feel of playing different roles. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Rather than somebody just being a product owner always and somebody being a developer always.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, so what I'll do is I'll just fix that typo in the document via PowerPoint, upload it on your site. and we will catch up one more time. And that time we'll be focusing on questions. By then, team would have reviewed this, and hopefully they will have some more questions to ask, and then I can do a final walkthrough of the process. Now that they have the knowledge of the process, they have the knowledge of the roles, and they have the knowledge of the meetings.
Wonderful.
And as I mentioned, I'm traveling, so it will be next week.
Yes, yes.
And after. So once again, thank you very much, Tatiana. I really appreciate it. And please don't forget to send the recording. I'd like to have it on my record.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I learned a lot, so I really appreciate your effort. Because I wasn't on the business side, so I learned a lot now today too.
Good. And a lot of great questions. Keep asking questions.
Thank you. I've got no shortage of them.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else have any follow-up questions? The last questions?
No questions. Just thank you for the presentation. That was very good.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right. So I will set up a next meeting, and I will share documents with students, and we will see where we're going to go from there. Thank you so much, Dale, also for coming up, and our other mentor. And thank you so much, everyone, again. Have a great evening.
Yes, thank you from which side as well. We appreciate it greatly. This was extremely informative. Happy holidays to everybody.
Likewise. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.